This video is only possible thanks to viewers like you. To support the channel and get more, go to patreon.com/optimisticduelist and subscribe. Link in the description. Hey everyone. So, Deltarune, huh? Yeah. Leave it to Toby Fox to just randomly drop a 4-hour demo to his long-awaited follow-up to Undertale for free, like he's Andrew Hussey in 2013 just randomly dropping a Flash update. I mean, talk about update culture, am I right? Anyway, Deltarune has left us all a lot to think about, and I'm finding myself a little surprised at how much I want to say about it. So, the following is one of 3 videos exploring the plot, themes, and characters of Deltarune. Needless to say, massive spoilers for both it and Undertale ahead. So if you haven't played them yet, I suggest you stop watching, go do that, and then come back. I'll wait here. Are you ready? Good, then let's dive in. The few criticisms of Deltarune that I've seen so far tend to fall into a few recurring camps. There's the criticism that the Dark World segment is basically just a compressed retelling of the story of Undertale with less complex and therefore more unrealistic characters. There's the people who dislike how your choices don't matter. You can't do a genocide run in Deltarune, for example. And there's the people uncomfortable with the strange dynamics at play between the characters from Undertale living in the world of light. Everyone seems a little colder and meaner to each other, and some relationships just seem off. The response to all 3 of these criticisms is the same. All of these elements exist by design, and presumably exist to build up to Deltarune's ultimate metatextual point. But just saying, well, that's the point, isn't necessarily a satisfying answer. So I want to try to tie these elements together with a shared context that I do find satisfying, and that I'm finding more satisfying the more I think about it, especially since it's pretty evocative for how Deltarune's story might evolve heading forward. So let's get into it. The first part of Deltarune I wanted to go over was the nature of the world that it takes place in, and the relationship between the worlds of light and dark that it's divided into. So, in Undertale, the underground and the monsters that inhabited it were certainly fantastical, but they also gave off a sense of being exceedingly real. The underground came off as a physical place that physically existed under the human world, that Frisk and the fallen child just happened to fall into. But the dark world isn't like that. Chris and Susie just stumble into it in a supply closet, and when they leave, they pop out somewhere else in the school, surrounded by items that make up the Dark World's existence. Kids' toys. A mess of chess, checkerboards, and card suits strewn about the room. Like they just got a little carried away with their imaginations while they were wandering around in the dark, and they found themselves playing pretend. Susie even wonders if she was dreaming or not. Even while they're in the dark world, there's some hints that what they're experiencing isn't entirely real. The first thing Susie says about the place is that it feels kind of like a theme park. The houses leading up to Rousey's castle looking more like stage props than things that people live in. And she comments that the food they eat doesn't quite seem to fill her, almost like it's devoid of matter or substance. Rousey's legend brings things into focus, as he equates light with hope and dark with dreams. The dark world is the dream world, an imaginary place, calling back to a more Victorian take on the fantasy genre that we don't often see in video games. Like a bunch of kids falling into Narnia through the back of a wardrobe, or Alice falling down the rabbit hole into Wonderland, only to leave it when she wakes up from her dream. It's a genre of fantasy interested in blurring the line between childhood imagination and the idea that the world may not be so solid and sure as it appears, that it is in fact an unstable place where imaginary other worlds like the realm of the Fae, hell, or even an angel's heaven are closely intertwined and always lingering, just out of sight. There are many mysterious entrances just waiting to be discovered by a curious child who wanders just out of sight. You'll find Alice references all over Deltarune if you're looking. The combination chess, checkers, and playing card motifs are pretty hard to miss. And like Wonderland, the Dark World operates on inherently gamey rules. The checker piece reaches the end of its board and gets powered up by a crown, for example. But there's shades of other stories too. The fountain Chris and Susie need to cross to get back to the world of light echoes Bastian's journey in the Neverending Story, where he has to reach the fountain of youth to cross from the world of fantasy to the world of man. An interesting parallel, both because we have reason to believe Toby's familiar with the Neverending Story through its intense parallels with Homestuck. Don't worry, we'll get to Homestuck, but that's another video. You're safe here. And because it can shed some light on the relationship between the Darkners and the Lightners. Because this fantastical quality extends to the inhabitants of the Dark World as much as the setting. This is a story that opens with Lancer telling us that we'll go east, because it's our only way home, sending us on a quest not unlike Dorothy's following the Yellow Brick Road. It's also a story where the bad guys openly announce that they're bad guys, wearing literal evil mustaches to carry out their self-described evil plans. Rousey, our most steadfast party member, is probably the biggest element contributing to this sense of fantasy. What with the green cloak and the scarf and the being the prince of a kingdom with no subjects, his whole aesthetic calls to mind the Little Prince. And both Prince's association with a particular flower certainly doesn't hurt matters. And if Flowey is the mouthpiece for the dire reality that underpins Undertale's rules, then Raziel is the exact opposite, the voice constantly pushing you towards taking the path that, in Undertale, would have resulted in the pacifist ending, the voice that speaks the fantasy that draws so many people to Undertale. The promise that this is a world where friendship, satisfaction, and a happy ending are inevitable, so long as you choose not to fight. He props up the fantasy of the dream world in other ways, like describing the checker piece as being in pain even though it looks exactly the same, as Susie points out. But by far his most important contribution is this bit, where he tells Lancer about how the purpose of Darkners is to assist Lightners in some way, going so far as to say it's the only way that Darkners can feel happy and fulfilled. Susie immediately shoots down that idea, but ironically, she's our best example of how Darkners might serve this purpose. Because Deltarune's Chapter 1 is really her story. She goes into the Dark World not just as a cruel bully, but as someone who explicitly feels isolated and alienated from everyone around her. She wants to solve her problems with brute force, embodying the philosophy of the genocide path, but her violent tendencies are quickly revealed to stem from her insecurities, both in her ability to play the role of a hero and to fit in with the demands of her society at all. It's doubtful that a girl who's so clearly nervous about even trying to solve simple puzzles would have an easy time with her schoolwork, for example. Exploring the Dark World gives her an outlet for this frustrated insecurity. It's not long before she discards the identity of a hero entirely and decides to play at being a villain instead. And once she gets that catharsis, it becomes clear that she's not actually all that bad a kid. And no, there aren't really any stakes to that antagonism, but well, that's the point. Lancer and Susie aren't real bad guys. In her heart of hearts, Susie doesn't actually want to hurt anybody. She's just a troubled kid coping with her problems and self-esteem issues by acting tough and lashing out. And if you believe Rousey, then the Dark World as a whole, and Lancer specifically, are probably at least somewhat tailored to Susie's psychology. So even when he believes his role is to be antagonistic, Lancer's true purpose as a Darkner was probably always to establish this sort of connection with Susie and, in so doing, provide the necessary stimuli to help her grow past the stuff that's holding her back. So the whole forest section is meant to feel less like a life and death struggle like Undertale often did, and more like a group of friends just LARPing or playing pretend. Depending on how you choose to engage the last fight with Susie and Lancer, different sides of Susie's persona come out. If you attack Lancer too much, Susie gets worried that he'll get really hurt and gives up her pride and joins you just to keep him safe. And if you just win him over, then she joins you with him, because she's already satisfied her desire to find a friend who won't judge her for being who she is, and she's now invested in keeping that friendship. So our choices are important, but only to the extent that they tell us about Susie, because this is her story to change, not ours. And once her friendship with Lancer is established, the rest of the Dark World arc is about putting it, and her, to the test. and for the sake of her friendship, she rises to the occasion in every way she seemed to fear that she wouldn't be capable of. She's able to solve a puzzle by herself. She puts down her hyper-aggressive mask and allows herself to be vulnerable with a friend, and in helping Lancer resolve his issues with his dad, she becomes a full-fledged hero, standing up not just for him, but for Rouse and Chris too. Again, whether you beat the king violently or non-violently, it's Susie who stands up at the end of it. In both scenarios, she becomes Lancer's hero, the people's hero, and even Rouse and your hero as well. And even once you leave the dark world, with its reality now being called into question, the experience has clearly changed her, leaving her both happier and more empathetic. Again, I'm reminded of the Neverending Story. There, the imaginary residents of the world of Fantastica, like the Darkners, are created by and dependent on quote-unquote real people. And in both stories, the imaginary realm has been abandoned by its creators and is now falling into decay. Until the human hero Bastion comes to save it, the world of the book is being eaten up by an abstract darkness referred to as the Nothing. And the dark world, of course, has its mysterious second fountain, allegedly rendering the world darker, yet darker still. But in the Neverending Story, that separation has a profound effect on the world of man, one which I think can be mirrored in the world of the Lightners. In the book, beings of imagination that are swallowed up by the Nothing are reborn in the world of man, as a different, more dangerous kind of fantasy, a lie. And ignoring the world of fantasy leaves humanity colder and more uncaring than they would otherwise be. Could the similar distance between the Darkners and the Lightners explain some of the cold and uncaring attitudes we see in the characters we love from Undertale? And if that's true, what does that mean for both worlds as the balance between light and dark begins to come undone?
When the light is running low and the shadows start to grow and the places that you know seem like fantasy.
As the dark world grows darker yet darker, will it also grow more dreamlike, more unrealistic? Will it pull the light and dark realms further away from each other? And if that happens, how will the Lightner's hope, equivalent to the Darkner's dreams, shift to complement the changes in the dark world? Who knows, honestly? Well, other than the clown. The clown seems to have a pretty good idea. Much like Flowey, Jevil seems quite aware that his reality is inherently unreal, that he exists in a game space, locked inside a structured narrative where actual change is a futile endeavor. We're told many times that we'll soon come to understand our own actions as futile as well. And that's very interesting, because Lancer identifies the Fun Gang as clowns several times during the adventure. And a clown is by nature almost inherently unreal. A circus or a clown show are a mutual fantasy that the audience and performer buy into. The performers to demonstrate their various arts, and the audience to be enthralled and entertained. The world under the circus tent is inherently dreamlike and arbitrary. It is a constructed, artificial space, much like a game. And a clown is a performer who's fully aware of the fakeness of it all, but chooses to perform anyway. An actor choosing to act. So I suspect that as the world grows darker, yet darker, the clowns that inhabit it will likely become more and more important, because we want to be enthralled and entertained. We want to see the story through to its conclusion. No matter what, the show must go on. And if we're all going to be caught in a world that will increasingly begin to feel more and more like a fantasy, then it's likely its only free agents will be those that realize it was a fantasy all along. Thanks for listening. We've got a lot to talk about with Deltarune, and I've got at least 2 more videos on it lined up, so if you enjoyed this one, I hope you'll consider checking those out. I hope you enjoyed this and came away with stuff to think about, and until next time, keep rising. Huge thanks go out to my patrons for making this video possible. If you want to help support the channel and come join us at our awesome and growing Discord community, feel free to join us for as little as $1 a month. You can also find me on the r/Hiveswap Reddit and Discord. That's all for now, so thank you again, and as always, keep rising, and hey, thanks.